God, there's so much people around just building left and right, man.
There was also some discussion of, again, a really strong feeling of the tribes continuing to try to get back land. Of just however we can get land back in terms of, I guess at this time, a lot of it's having to buy back land, but just making, it's such an important part of our ability to have stewardship on the land is having control of the land. Well, that's not the right word, but having, just having it in the tribe's resources.
The thing I thought about was, complain about was that they put the dam, on that pecking horse down there to for the water, and they sprayed that water. I mean, not sprayed it, but they put it into that sort of white people could have grazing. And as I said, who's paying for this? And it's the tribes paying for it. I heard, I'm not sure, that they said the tribes paying for it. Why should we pay for it to whatever? You know what I'm talking about? And they put the dam there, Was it, do you know anything about that? Is it help the lakes or just helping the people out there?
It's mainly for irrigation.
Huh?
Mainly for irrigation. That's why they built all the dams.
And we have to pay, and then the tribe has to pay for it.
I
What they say is that the workers that work on those projects get paid by those that utilize the water. That's what the compact is. But we still pay for it regardless. We pay for it because of overgrazing, overutilization of our natural resources. So no matter what, Stephen, we pay for it. That's how I see it.
That issue of especially the FIP and all the structures associated with the Flathead Indian Irrigation Project, that came up quite a bit last week too. And just now, Stephen is bringing it up again. Just a lot of those structures were not necessarily ones that the tribes wanted, but they ended up having to pay for them a lot of times, and especially even individual families would have to pay for those. And again, some of those structures are not even being used now, but the footprint of them, like empty ditches and ditches that don't even have gates on them anymore, but those are still there impacting the land and dividing the land in a way. But and they were never ones that the tribal people wanted, but they're there and they're impacting. I think another big one that we talked about that the elders talked about last week too was cultural preservation and the importance of, again, even just internally for us as tribal people to really have strong cultural preservation and to really look towards the elders for guidance on that, and really talking to about how some of these bigger changes have impacted even that process, and how that cultural preservation and looking to the elders is really important still.
Very good. Thank you, Gwen. And thank you, everyone who's joining today. Oh, go ahead, Mike.
I only had a couple more real quick things. So one of the things that wasn't mentioned was the spiritual aspect of these areas. And some of the elders said that just entering some areas, you can have that feeling. So sometimes when those areas are disturbed too much, then that spirit leaves. The other thing is, some of the places don't have the cover that they used to have. So some of the streams That was a concern. Some localized over harvesting in some areas. Removal of beavers was a big thing. So taking the beavers out, and then I think Gail was trapping them all the beavers, right? Gail up there in Nirada. Gail ended up out at our office. Gail, if you guys want to come up here to Division of Fire, you're welcome, but you can stay down there if you want. We have a lot of food here, so if you want to come up here. One other thing that I heard was some concern about the chemicals used around the lake in the orchards. Cherries, apples, those things are impacting the riparian wetlands and aquatic resources. So with that, we'll let you take over, Sean. Thanks. You're on mute.
That's the first time people haven't heard me. Thank you, Mike, and thank you. Oh,
Sean, we have, Stephen wants to say something, please.
Could I ask a question on that? On that Dixon, they used to have a lot of plums there. Why did they cut all that, why did, by that water, remember? Did you know? How come they cut all that out, you know? And I remember a lot of people used to go down there and pick those, you know? And those plums, you know, the wild plums, were they wild plums? And why did they just cut them all down, you know? That's another thing I'd like to ask a question about that.
So when they named it, the name means wild plum, right? Or if I remember right, when they named it,
Yeah.
it means wild plum.
Came from a coyote story.
Oh,
Hold on, check that one.
John Peter Paul told a coyote story about how plums came there. I don't tell the story now, but even though it's supposed to be winter, right, Lucy? Because isn't it supposed to be
Is
winter?
that why they cut them all down?
No.
Just because his story, or?
No, there was a boat launch there. They call it Hoskins Landing. And there was a boat launch and they were clearing I think what happened was, and we could check with natural resources, check with Whisper, but they were clearing that boat launch area because the wild plums were encroaching. I'm guessing, I don't know for sure why they did it, but it's at Hoskins Landing.
There used to be a lot of it, and there was a bridge that used to go all the way across. And that's where they put the dump there. I still remember that, you know. And across there, they used to go and dig the bitterroot, you know. There was a lot of bitterroot in that. I just have to.
Yeah, those wild plums were from a coyote story.
Somebody cut them all down for the coyotes. Oh, I just, you know.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and thank you, everyone. We heard a lot of things in that conversation, you know, aspects of recreation, you know, land use management or conflicts about land use management and proper use and all those things. So I think it sets us up really well for the conversation today, the rest of the conversation. I'm gonna go back to sharing my screen for just a few more minutes, if you can bear with me here. Can remember how to do it. Okay, so thanks very much for an update and a summary of the things that you all talked about over the prior 2 weeks. Again, you know, how do we value these riparian, aquatic, and wetland systems, and what do we do about it? And we're especially talking about that today. So thank you for the update from both locations there. I'll say that on Zoom and on Mural, and again, the link to the Mural box chart is there if you haven't gotten to it already. We had, between the last 2 weeks, somewhere between 15 and 23 participants. We all spent 3 hours together. So summing that up, and that doesn't include the elders of the cultural committees. We put together 114 professional hours together already. So congratulations and thank you. We did that through facilitated breakout groups, which we'll do again today. And in general, the process is sharing knowledges, building on prior success. And we heard a little bit of that from our elders here who shared on some examples of the way that they've been successful in conservation before, but really about finding commonalities and ultimately getting to strategies that we think have a lot of ability to do the things that we want to and result in the outcomes that we all find valuable. I wanted to show you this, and I didn't want to necessarily, I want to thank you or ask for forgiveness, Michael, for using this graphic. But what it shows is, essentially that there's more than one ways to know, and there's more than one way to accomplish the conservation goals that we seek here. And we don't necessarily need to all be on the same boat to do that, but we certainly need to be going in the same direction here, right? And so acknowledging these historical harms, being respectful, walking in beauty, and understanding everyone's capacity. These things are important to us as we move forward here. So thank you for those elders and committee members that have been in person, and for those folks that have joined us through Zoom here. A quick recap of what we did during the breakout groups. Again, riparian, aquatic, and wetlands. This is our focus here. We started with knowledge shared at listening sessions from the Confederated Salish and Kootenai tribes and their conservation committees. Their cultural committees. We reviewed management plans. That includes tribal, agency, community visioning type plans. Depending on whether it's riparian, wetlands, or aquatic, we looked at somewhere between 18 and 25 plans and summarized everything that they were telling us about what's important and how to go about conserving these things. And we've been working on the LCD for 5 years here. So we have the phase 1 and 2 results. We advance with knowledge, passion, and creativity of the workshop participants, those in person and those joining us on Zoom. Session 1, we identified key attributes and health indicators. Essentially, what are we looking at? How do we know if it's healthy? And how can we measure its health through time? So we have a mechanism to be confident that anything that we invest in these features or these landscape elements is paying us back. And then last week, we elevated a set of conservation strategies that are likely to achieve the LCD goals. Again, it's a very brief summary of a lot of work that went into it. It is all documented in the mural that you'll see, and the deeper information. The stuff in mural will eventually get into the website as well, but you see the website below. Today's objective is to create a good first draft of a strategy roadmap for riparian, aquatic, and wetland conservation. And there's lots of ways to do these things and lots of ways to communicate them. And I show you a couple on screen here. Again, the bottom center one is a graphic that Mike Derglow and his colleagues developed. That's the Lifeways model. But we can look at these things in various ways, and some of them are a little bit more technical than others, but ultimately they're trying to sell the same story, that by looking at your image from left to right, it talks about what the problem is and how to rectify it and the kinds of steps and activities that we would need. Now, we're going to focus in the breakout groups here on the example that's on the left-hand side of your screen. It's a pretty standardized way to develop these kind of strategic approaches in a logic and inclusive way, right? And it's a process developed by the conservation standards. And we're going to develop what these things called a theory of change. But you don't really have to worry about theory of change and defining it too much here. Essentially, we're going to take a deep dive into some conservation strategies and talk about what it really needs, what it would really need to accomplish those strategies. Who needs to be involved? What kinds of actions need to be done? Whose opinion or whose perspective could use some changing so that we can achieve these conservation goals here. And we're going to talk about that here in a few minutes, but don't get too, bound up on the boxes and arrows. We can tell this story in many different ways. The conservation standards gives us a real good way to document it. So that's what we'll be using in our breakout groups. So to give you an idea of what this theory of change might look like, I want to use an example of the whitebark pine in the crown of the continent. And this has been an ongoing and long-term effort, but ultimately it results in what we wanted, what you see right now on the right-hand side of your screen. That is, whitebark pines are growing at culturally and ecologically valued places, right? That makes a lot of sense. We all know how important whitebark pine is, both ecologically and culturally. We want more pines and healthy whitebark pine systems to be growing in the right spaces. So what does that take? Well, we had to come up with a kind of a generalized strategy here, and the yellow hexagon that you see is a strategy. One of the things, a big strategy here, was to plant or replant whitebark pine in culturally and ecologically valued places. That'll get us to this objective that we have on the right-hand side of the screen. But it's not a straight line. It takes a lot of things to do, right? And in this case, the example, this kind of theory of change, how we got to actually do what we strategized, was the first thing is we co-developed a whitebark pine restoration strategy for the entire crown of the continent ecosystem. We also stepped those plans down to specific jurisdictions, like tribally held lands or national parks, national forests, right? And by having those, working on those plans together and thinking both regionally and at place-based areas, right, we began to develop the concept of identifying resilient and resistant trees out in the wild, and also to use Western science to try and understand and identify whitebark pine blister rust resistant alleles. The way that you do that is you work together, right? And you share knowledge respectfully. And so that's just what we're trying to do here, right? And if we can do this all successfully, like we did with whitebark pine, in this particular case, that resulted in collecting cones from resistant trees and developing techniques to mass produce rust-resistant seeds, right? In the meantime, right, we leverage this partnership, and 3 jurisdictions went in on this ARI grants. That is Glacier National Park, the Confederated Salish Kootenai Tribes, and Flathead National Forest. And we were able to use this structured landscape scale collaborative planning to raise funds. Right? We couldn't do a lot of this without the funds, because the funds really paid and leveraged a lot of knowledge that came out of the Confederated Salish and Kootenai Tribe plant propagation system, the greenhouse staff and training. So by bringing all these things together, we were able to produce a large crop of resistant seedlings. And then together, we were able to plant them out. We're in the process of that right now through this grant, right? And so we need to think about, let's evaluate how this whole process works. So hopefully you can kind of see an example here of a results chain or a theory of change, how we got to achieve the goals that we wanted to. It's a little bit more complicated than just, grabbing some trees and planting them in the ground. Okay, so we're really trying to go through that. And here's another example for Canada lynx and road reduction, particularly in the crown of the continent landscape. And what you'll see is, things are not necessarily that simple. If we want to let me direct your eyes to the right-hand side of the screen. If we want to reduce Canada lynx, have Canada lynx persist through time, we have to think about ways of reducing the threats to Canada lynx. In this particular case, the threat that we're thinking about is the proliferation of roads in the forested areas where lynx hang out, right? And it takes more than just one sort of strategy, and we recognize that. But what we're really going to focus on today is we're going to try and focus on just developing one of these theories of change, right? And so in this particular case, if we want Canada lynx persistence across the crown of the continent landscape, we're going to need to develop, one of the strategies we're going to need to develop is incentives for private land road management, right? That seems to make sense. If we can get private lands to reduce the amount of roads, the road densities, or the impactful things that roads do to Canada lynx, right? We're going to have to convince private landowners to do that. So it's pretty obvious in that case. In this case, we needed to identify the audience. Let's face it, if we're talking about incentives for private land, the audience is landowners, right? And the threat here is reduced roads. So we need to do that little bit of setup before we get into strategy. You can read this now as sort of an if-then statement from left to right or right to left. And I'll just start from left to right here. So if we want to develop incentives for private land managers, we would need to ensure that landowners and managers see the value in links persistence, right? They're not even going to be interested in an incentive program if they don't see the value in links on the landscape, right? So in order to do that, or if we do that, then we'll see reduced road densities on private lands because we've incentivized them. And that they took those incentives, our private land partners took those incentives and reduced road densities. If the road densities might compete for a best road system, right? That gets them more incentive. And instead of just a financial incentive, for example, it also gives them some other sort of social cultural reasons to address links and the threats to links. Ultimately, that will lead to a reduction in road-related links mortality and therefore a contribution to Canada Link's persistence on the landscape. Went through that, you probably heard me skip a whole bunch of things. You forgot about this. You know, if you don't do this, you're going to do that. And that's the reason we're here today, is because collectively we can build these stronger strategies or roadmaps, right? These roadmaps that get us to conservation of the feature that we're interested in. So the tools that we have is the Zoom that you're all on already. The mural board, once again, there's a link to it. We will be going to facilitated breakout rooms to guide you through your tasks and answer any questions you have while we collaboratively work on solutions and really think through the assumptions and the actions needed to make those solutions valuable. And then a summary of prior work that you'll see on the mural board here. But really the tool that we have that's most important is your knowledge, expertise, and creativity. Okay, so I think we can hopefully have a minute for questions here.
I was waiting for somebody to say, to get them talk, forgot what I wanted to say back.
Okay, that's, yeah.
One of them's on the water, like on the lake. Something that could be corrected for pollution are all the houses along the lake with their leaky sewers. You know, that needs to be addressed, that needs to be taken care of. It's been a problem for a long time.
Yes, thank you very much, right? And that's exactly where we're heading. So thank you for that comment, right? If that's an issue, right, then we talk about what do we need to address that? And then, you know, I'm not going to sort of figure it out for you. That's going to be your job as a breakout group. But thank you for that great example.
To work with the state.
Are there any other questions here?
Okay, well, I'm going to turn it over to Quinn Shirtliff here.
Hey, Sean.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Before we break out, I just wanted to mention one thing, and I heard this from, I think, both groups of elders. There was a question of why have we not invited them, the elders, in at a more earlier part of this process. So you've mentioned a few times that this is phase 3. We've been doing this for 3 years, I believe, and part of that reason, and we have been at the table. So we have represented myself, Rich Jansen, Elliot Fox, and Mike Brucehead are all on this Crown Managers Partnership, and we all have been at the table. And we wasn't, you know, it's basically making a determination of at what point do we bring everybody, all of the elders in, and that so that first part of the phase 1 was identifying who all the people at the table should be, and then phase 2 was getting those names together, and you know, so here we are in phase 3, and we are asking the elders to participate. So it's kind of one of those things where, you know, I don't know if we maybe we should have invited more elders at the beginning, but it was just basically us sitting around trying to brainstorm about who should be there. And we did have representation, like I said. So Rich and I have been on the CMP for a long time, Elliot Fox and Mike Brucehead. So That's what I just wanted to bring that up. Thanks.
Before we leave, I had a question. I think it was in the seventies, correct me if I'm wrong, when we looked at, our air quality. And we implemented some standards regarding air quality. And, I'm concerned about more industry within the exterior boundaries of our homeland. And I wonder if we revisited air quality concerns, and was there a way to provide more restrictions if necessary in regards to emissions, air quality within the exterior boundaries of our homeland? The reason I bring this up, it's not just the impact of the water. Our air is being impacted, and we're facing challenges like with the proposed gravel pit in Arlee as an example. And I really think that in order to mitigate some of those things, maybe we need to re-examine our current standards and see if there is a process that, of course, I'm not familiar with, that's outside me. But to look at how we may be able to develop further restrictions or some type of standards around that. Just for your thoughts in regards to this environmental stuff. Thank you. Very much.
Allie has her hand raised.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. I'm Allie Ferguson. I'm here representing the Aquatic Nucleate First Nation. And I wanted to, building on your question there, Mike, has there been much involvement from Ktunaxa nations in Canada? Just like thinking about the geographic extent, I guess, of the crown of the continent. And I've just, I attended the first session. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the next one, but I'm showing up as a technical expert representing the nation, but there could be opportunity to bring in more traditional knowledge holders from the kind of Canadian portion of the area. I'm just curious if there has been in the past. I wasn't really aware.
Well, I guess I can quickly answer that, or at least address it, Allie. I'm not sure I can fully address it, but the Crown Managers Partnership, and I think we all have been working more towards that. And the one example I can give for the Ktunaxa was they co-hosted the Crown Managers Partnership, and the Occam Band co-hosted the Crown Forum 2 years ago, and working very hard to build those relationships and recognize that it takes time and trust, and hopefully each of these iterations builds more.
I also want to mention that there's discussion too. We've had listening sessions with the tribal elders at CSKT, but we are also trying to figure out logistics for listening sessions as well for the other tribal nations, and that's a priority that we have. So.
Great, thank you, Gwen. Okay, any last questions here? And don't forget, this isn't the end of the conversation. We'll be having this over and over, and so it's not your last chance to have a question or a comment or feedback, which is really what we're looking for, is for you to bring forth your knowledge and your expertise, your experiences, and add them to our shared knowledges so that we make this inclusive and as effective as possible. Okay, with that, I will, go ahead.
I wanted to just make sure we understood too, when we're coming back into this meeting, what time did we decide we wanted to do that today? And do we want to talk about what that looks like?
Yeah, I believe we're going to be coming back with about 15 minutes left. Quinn, is that right?
No, we've got, we want to have a share back at 11:05 is the aim to be back together. So we'll have about 30 minutes to share back, and then and then some reflections and that kind of thing. So yeah, 11:05 is the target.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna go into breakout groups here. Well, Quinn is gonna give us a little bit more guidance on how to use Mural. Our folks that are out at remote stations, if you want to, you're welcome to leave now, and we'll see you again at 11:05. You're also welcome to hang on here and see how the breakout groups are using Mural. So over to you, Quinn.
Okay, yeah, I'll just be really brief here because many of you are familiar and your facilitators can let you know, but exactly what you need to do. But I'm just showing on the screen this is the area that the wetlands group was working in, and the first thing you'll do is to come in and together just agree upon which one of your strategies, these ideas that you brainstormed last time, which one you want to pursue and flesh out in terms of creating. You're trying to create a template of what it would take in terms of the activities that would be involved to implement that activity, and what are the assumptions that the project manager would be making if they're implementing this, assumptions about the results that would happen. And so you're trying to express that and articulate those. And ultimately, the purpose of this is to have a template so that somebody, if they wanted to implement, say, install fencing to protect wetlands, they'd have already a template of here's the things that you need to watch out for, and here's the places you ought to monitor to make sure that you're actually accomplishing what you set out to accomplish. And here's some pitfalls, some assumptions that you could be making that could lead you the wrong direction. And that's we're getting the group collective thinking to put out a template for one of these. Over time, we'll produce more of them. And so that's your job today, and you'll be working in the panel that's below. I'm going to zoom out here. In the panel, the roadmap panel down below, and your facilitators can walk you through that. So I think with that, let's go ahead. Maddie, you want to go ahead and open? Maddie's been putting people into, setting people up to go into breakout groups. Are we ready to open that up, Maddie?
Yep. And I just wanted to say we have a significant amount of people in Riparian and not as many people in Aquatics and Wetland. So maybe I'll open the rooms just as is, and then in Riparian you can talk amongst yourselves if anyone's okay with transferring over to one of the other groups. If not, no worries. We can just work with what we have.
Okay, go ahead and open up. And if somebody's willing right now, say, "Oh yeah, I don't care where I go," just drop it in the chat, and we can we'll put you into the other room right now.
Sounds good.
All right, let's go ahead and do there.
About some of the main threats that impact wetlands, and two of the biggest threats that we talked about were altered hydrology, where wetlands may have certain features that drain the water out, tile drainage, as an example, and then invasive species as another primary threat. And so the main activity or action that we dove into was basically wetland restoration, which we defined as both, restoring hydrologic connection of wetlands and also addressing invasive species. And we talked a lot about, who are the players in this landscape who are going to be doing the restoration work. And a lot of times that's local, state, or federal agencies that are supporting a lot of the work. And so we felt like understanding or having those agencies having good working relationships with landowners and with tribes is important before we can make any progress. And that those agencies need to be able to provide the capacity to groups of people to get the work done. So some of the so if we have that, if we have good relationships, working relationships with agencies that are assisting people with doing the restoration, we also felt like that's going to lead to consistent messaging that people on the landscape will be getting from, from different groups. They won't be getting different sort of stories from different collaborators. And agencies who do this work regularly are going to know how to best work with landowners to get wetland restoration projects done. So if we have good working relationships, if the agencies know how to best work with landowners, the next result was that landowners would have a increased understanding of the ecosystem value of wetlands and understand how wetland restoration might impact their bottom line, might impact their business. And if they have a good understanding of the value of the wetlands, how it might impact their business, and the next result is that they decide to do a wetland restoration project. And along this pathway, we identified a number of potential actions that could facilitate some of these intermediate kind of outcomes, everything from some educational things, some building capacity, funding. We also talked about prioritizing in the landscape where are the wetlands that are most altered and that are in need of restoration, and doing some prioritization at a landscape scale. I will stop there. If anyone else from the group wants to chime in.
Yeah, I think that was just well said, Orion. A lot to go over here. There was a lot of back and forth. We jumped to the end, we went back to the beginning and kind of went back and forth and filled everything in between. So it took a lot of time, but once we narrowed down a particular strategy that we wanted to focus on, we really started getting the ball rolling. So if we had a little bit more time, we might be able to flesh it out better, but came along pretty well.
And to the point that you got to, do you see any major challenges? You were identifying some of your results of they'd have to be have good working relationships. The landowners would need to understand things. Did anything rise to the top of, wow, this would be a major challenge? One of the biggest hurdles to get over. Did you feel like we got to that point yet, or were we to identify anything like that?
Anyone from the group want to address that?
I would think that working with private landowners would probably be in trying to changing people's minds on anything is probably extremely difficult. If anyone's tried to change a person's mind on something, especially when it comes to impacting their bottom line and their profits, that's probably going to be, in my view, the most difficult mountain to climb here.
And then doing that throughout the whole landscape.
Yeah.
So as this group continues to work on that, that if this is a tool to help, projects, that part of the chain probably ought to be really fleshed out of what, the assumptions that go into, we're going to implement this strategy, and then a miracle occurs, and then all the landowners are on board doing the thing. We really flesh out that miracle that has to happen, and that would be the most useful for somebody that's excited. Oh yeah, we want to do this too. You're providing that forward thinking.
I think when one of the things that kind of intermediary is that it was building the capacity of local groups that have those connections already within the community. So it would be very hard for like agencies, tribal governments potentially have it easier, but getting those connections relies on having that and working with local groups that already have those connections to reach the landowner. So there's multiple steps in building that capacity. And it would be multiple groups within the Crown ecosystem.
Great. Good point. Okay, let's call it. We don't have time to take questions from others, so let's go ahead and move to how about aquatics? Oh, and we also recognize Mike. At least I see Mike's back. I know they had technical difficulties. I didn't see if Gwen's group made it back. But Mike, can you hear us?
We can, but we don't have the big monitor. I don't know how to fix that. So I'm on my laptop. So, did you have some notes, Gwen? From the aquatic? Is that what you're talking about?
Actually, well, since you're back, if you're all back, can you share out? Can you take 5 minutes to share out what your groups, what you came up with?
I have one.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm choosing the right one. I think one of the elders for the last 3 meetings, one of the main topics that has been talked about has been cultural and language preservation as a means for conservation. So we've talked about that quite a bit. We talked about potentially some of the ways that that might look, possibly through some of the pathways that our tribes already have created for language and cultural preservation. We do have some language programs that are already established right now. So thinking about that. Sean DeFrance also mentioned, when the cat's out of the bag, but he mentioned he was also just, the National Fish and Wildlife Federation has just reached out to him. He just found out, they're planning on coming here soon.
End of July,
sorry, to do, kind of a on-site retreat and meeting. And he thinks that some of the purposes for that would be to consider future grant opportunities. So that is one thing. I know one of the other things in regards to potentially that supportive language and cultural preservation would be even considering internally how some of the grant monies that the tribes get overall might be designated towards the culture committees to help support more language and cultural preservation. So that's a really big one that we've talked about quite a bit here. We also talked about another strategy that I think has come up now a couple times today is looking at our air quality regulations. We were the first tribes in the nation to come up with air quality standards. And in fact, they are being used right now, hopefully successfully, for a couple of, for some opposition, for instance, to a big asphalt project that they're trying to get in the Arley area. So in the comment period for that project, the tribes have invoked the fact that we do have air quality standards that would be impacted. But that's something that has come up again as a way that we might consider, either making some of our regulations more strong or just even trying to look at what we already have. So that's one thing. We also talked about, there's some really good examples that CSKT has right now for how we are taking care of our waterways. We've got some unique programs here on our reservation. For instance, things like MAC days. There's a lot of things that are happening with the Flathead Indian Irrigation Project in terms of some of the ways that they're fixing some of that infrastructure. Like, for instance, instead of having straight canals, having bends in the canals and the irrigation ditches.
Or to slow the water down, keep it cool.
Yeah, for the 4 Cs. And then even things like looking at the way that they're holding water in, in a dam, for instance, to think about protection of species, if it's nesting season or, different types of seasons for different species. Our Jocko Restoration Project is really exceptional in regards to, again, some examples of things that might be helpful for us if, just, it's good for us to share probably.
And it's good for us to teach young people so they can, maybe we understand now why Jocko restoration is important for maintenance of bull trout, to make sure that the stronghold of bull trout in the upper Jocko are maintained, but maybe young people won't, they've never fished bull trout. They don't know how important that native species is. So having that educational piece is important.
We also talked about, and in fact, it was helpful for our group because the question around invasive species, knapweed specifically, had come up, and we were talking about some of the biological controls that are known and how successful those have been, and or in kind of a pilot process, it almost sounds like. But then it was helpful again collectively because we learned that NRCS actually just got a large amount of funding, and there's some resources there that people can access. So I think again, this process of that sharing even internally here has been helpful. And it brings me, I guess there's a couple other ones too. A couple of other things that came up too is in regards to preserving cultural sites. Again, really looking at some of our internal processes to make sure things like cultural clearance is happening. And again, another theme I think is just really, again, looking towards the elders for information and knowledge, especially when it comes to some of that preservation.
And guidance and direction. I mean, instead of, just mining information, one of the things that, I don't know if it was Mary Jane or Sam or somebody said, come early and come often, instead of just saying, we've got this project, we need to have your stamp on it to say, what are your thoughts about this? I mean, like the whole situation up above Stephens, that's a bad deal, and we're way down the road on that. That's a terrible deal. So, that potential disturbance. So bringing in a project in the early stages rather than coming in at the very end and asking for approval, building some kind of partnerships.
I think, and then there's some other examples again that I think are important to mention, that probably the most powerful overarching gesture would be again cultural and language preservation. Even, again, talking about places where there's overuse, and how again through cultural preservation we could consider even how that's happening with Bitterroot, for instance. I think that was an example. But then there's another kind of, again, I think it's a pretty powerful overarching theme, and it has to do with some of the work that's happening right now around the buffalo treaties. And again, really looking, the tribes are creating their own treaties amongst themselves for that, for the buffalo to come back. And really in consideration of some of the challenges and some of the goals that we have across the crown, that could be a really good and powerful structure to think about again, and how we might want to move forward. And if there's more to say, I don't know much about that one. So
Sean, I think what I'm gonna recommend is that Gwen and I and Kenneth and Sean DeFrance get together after the four of us, and we have a bunch of notes that we've been taking, and we'll put together the document, and then we'll share it with the elders to make sure they're okay with moving forward with this, and we'll share it out to you guys. Is that all right? Did anybody else have anything? Okay, thanks.
That's great.
Great, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Gwen, and everyone who joined in person. Thank you for coming, and thank you for your contributions and knowledges.
Okay, should we move to the Riparian, or I think we were going to the Aquatics next. Who's going to share back from the aquatics group?
I was going to share back from the aquatics group, so I can do that. We all thought Lynn would do the best job of reporting back, but she said it was against the rules, so I'll do my best. Maybe is it okay if I just share my screen to try to just focus on the story, but it might help to just see the visual. Or do you want to? Is that okay? You can see it?
That's fine.
Okay.
You'll have to really zoom in though to make it readable to do that.
Okay. So our strategy that we talked through and tried to develop out was around reducing incompatible land use through various stewardship incentives, including conservation easements or other stewardship memorandums of understanding. So it's a pretty broad goal, and it can benefit all of those values, riparian, wetland, or aquatics. But here the focus was on land use relevant to aquatic connectivity in the sense of both like hydrological connectivity and physical connectivity. And the strategy was kind of multi-pronged, I guess, in terms of bringing people together to have that common goal of active stewardship and conservation on the landscape. And then the overall improved ecosystem function. And key to that was finding funding sources to easily implement these conservation strategies. So one of the results was developing a common list of activities or protocols for landscape conservation. So that's both the tools for the actual conservation itself in terms of, you know, what kind of conservation easements or memorandum of understanding or government policies or regulations for conservation could be considered and utilized. And then also what are the actual restoration activities on the landscape that could be implemented that would improve the overall function of that aquatic ecosystem. Making sure that Indigenous perspectives are incorporated throughout the process. One thing that I had brought up, which I don't know if this resonates with the other tribes and nations on the call, was that I've been hearing from Aquatic Nucleate was like active management of the land rather than like passive, just, you know, having full conservation and not, you know, implementing fire or so making sure that you are actively managing the landscape. And then I guess the last step was monitoring the effectiveness of those tools. So that could be making sure that all these different landowners and groups are talking to each other. You could have a map that shows what all the conservation efforts are throughout the whole area, and you could create little stories to highlight like some early adopters or success stories in the region. And we also talked a little bit about like, are there any unintended consequences, I guess, of or concerns, and just the challenge, I guess, if you don't have clear guidance for various landowners, and people might see it as restrictive. So really getting that like early buy-in from everybody working towards a common goal was key. So yeah, I don't know if anyone else wants to add anything that was in the aquatics group that I missed.
Allie, you did beautifully, better than I did in my summary, so I don't have anything to add.
And I think just clarifying, one of the assumptions of conservation easements can be that it does lead to better stewardship, but that's not necessarily the case. So we're not looking at land conservation easements as the only tool, but rather focusing on those aquatic systems, and that's one tool in the toolbox. But everything, whether it's septic maintenance to planting to anything that you can think of, but just bringing everybody to that focus, and then using numerous tools and incentives. So yeah, thanks, Adi.
Yeah, and it's just another one to point out, a tool that we talked about was finding mechanisms to support the tribes in their goals in purchasing back their lands or ensuring stewardship of their lands. And so that would be something we as part of the strategy to work with the tribes on.
Looks like Stuart, you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Ali. Really interesting, and it extends from Lynn's stuff. Was water management regarded as part of the element in stress and threat in this case? Dams and diversions, irrigation.
Yeah, that was actually the first part of the conversation we had, is when we talked about the sort of outlining what the strategy is and how broad it is. And we ended up saying that this would be really anything that would be impactive of riparian aquatic or wetland systems. And so if those are part of those impacts and we're in a place where there is a lot of irrigation or is a lot of dams, then we would be working, it would be in these partnership groups that hopefully we could do to identify those and then work at whatever tools we would need for that, for conservation easements or stewardships. Is that what you're getting at, Stuart?
Yes, sure. Thank you. Yep.
Yeah, so it was broad. I guess the answer to that question is.
Okay. Thank you, Aquatics. That's where we were, right? Aquatics group. I should ask, Mike, for your group, was that helpful or distracting for the screen to be shared there with those boxes? Mike, is Mike still with us? Oh, there he is. Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, go ahead.
I was distracting them trying to set up the screen.
Okay.
Do you guys anybody have any comments about it? Can you start over from the beginning?
We just want we can, if it's helpful so that you can see what is written, we can do that, or we can just have people talk, whichever would be the least.
We're good.
Okay, all right. Okay, Riparian group, go ahead. Who's?
Hi, it's Noreen.
Okay.
Yeah, so thanks to lots of good thinking in our group. I think there's definitely some quite a few commonalities with the other two groups, but I will obviously re-say the things because the context is a little bit different of what we were using it for in some cases. So we did take some time to think, well, what is the thing we're doing, which was our choice was sort of education outreach based on last week's decision. That's the kind of activity focus that we were working through, but we're like, well, what threat is it addressing? And we did also choose incompatible land uses because it kind of is more encompassing than some of the other specific things that were identified in threats. And we also honed down in our audience, we decided, because there was many possible audiences, was municipal leaders, decision makers, and potentially like watershed managers, so more place-based decision makers, that, as opposed to say, we decided not to do K to 12 kids. So kind of more, a little bit of a broader, higher level decision makers. And the first starting piece, which we didn't necessarily solve how to accomplish this, but is that in order to do this, we, through the thread of these things, we need in place a champion of that place, that sector, that land use activity. So champions are critical. They're going to only be required to make these other pieces possible. So we did focus, like I said, on place-based sort of watershed and also interest-based. So we need people to actually care and think there's value in something for them. So finding those shared values will obviously lead to a lot more support and that longevity to get engagement, because this is about educating. But that educating is going to do things. And hopefully. So part of the starting we started off sort of gathering of information, assessing the current conditions. So not only on riparian health, but also on things like knowledge. So knowing where things are at. Some of that's obviously been done in the multiple years and the review of all the documents that was done before these workshops or as part of the background. But assessing and gathering information will help plan, identify people's knowledge, the ecological conditions, values, and also potentially where things are at in terms of behaviors and actions. So kind of like a spectrum of baseline knowledge and understanding. Obviously delivering actual outreach activities, workshops, presentations, tours. Part of that we decided, in addition to sharing knowledge, which we didn't focus on the content so much, but is that one of those things need to be success stories, that things that have worked that can demonstrate and hopefully help others do the same or use them as templates or learning. And part of that sort of new tools or getting other people to try those things would include research on either things like planning and policy, research on economics that would then inform why there could be change policy. So building new land use plans and policies might end up resulting, hopefully, in things like riparian setback planning and policy approaches. But all of this requires resources and support, and we thought that given the kind of frame of the audience and the threat that we talked about in the place-basedness, that needs to be to watershed stewardship groups, environmental and conservation or other groups and organizations that are working, because somebody has to actually deliver the content, deliver the expertise, share the stories, lead workshops or tours. The ultimate outcome, of course, is things that will benefit communities, benefit infrastructure, benefit the ecosystem, in this case, riparian areas specifically. And to identify that, we would tap back into the same kind of tracking or assessment pieces that we'd established early on to determine kind of baseline or current condition. And part of that would include land use metrics, hopefully seeing them change. One of the things that we noted, particularly we don't, at least in our group, and I don't think in the wider group of aquatic and wetlands, we don't have any, and we talked about this being planners. We don't have anybody from the Alberta government. We don't have anybody from Alberta municipalities, rural or urban, represented. We didn't think there was much representation from regional districts, which like in British Columbia, and even the other jurisdictions, again, we weren't totally familiar with who's all in the other groups, but that kind of entity level decision makers seems kind of absent and kind of critical to, putting in place some of the things. And that's just absent in these workshops that we're doing right now, but obviously they would be kind of critical to the pieces that we talked about. So I hope I covered everything, that kind of the key pieces, but I'm happy to have the rest of the group add to that or questions if there's time for that.
Thanks. No time for questions, but yeah, anyone else have from the group anything you want to chime in?
Yeah, anything I missed that you guys want to emphasize more?
Okay, sounds like you knocked it out of the park. Good job.
Thanks, Noreen. And one thing I will mention is we always had a through current of how we're going to measure this stuff. We didn't really talk into a lot of details, but sort of evaluating, monitoring, evaluating companies happens at several steps, and something that we still need to flesh out. But thanks, Noreen. That was great.
Okay, super. I'm going to turn some time over to take us home here, and Sean and Mike. But before we do, just we'll be sending out an evaluation. We'd love to get your feedback, as we've said, and Sean may get into this, but we brought you guys together as experts in riparian, wet places, and we're going to take this show on the road with the other features in the landscape, and so you guys, bless your hearts, are our guinea pigs. And so we really value feedback about, in all the other cases, it should be in person. And so this was more difficult. Obviously, our tribal friends are not in person with it would be much better if we were all in one place. But this was the best we could do to get started here. So we'll really want your feedback. Also, like last time, the end goal here, we started. The end goal is to create standing committees of experts who could over time help us develop additional products and review and peer review. It's not you have to spend this much time, but just if you'd be willing to participate over time in whatever capacity you could give. There's a place on the mural board from last week. You could add your name or just drop your name in the chat if that's easiest, and we will put you on the list just so you'll be part of the team going forward. Sean, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, great. I just saw some feedback from Noreen, so please keep it coming. I am going to share my screen one more time and kill you with PowerPoint this time, but it's really just one slide. Let's see if I can get it up here. So obviously, hopefully everyone's, really wondering what's the next steps here. And I just kept this slide fairly simple. I want to remind folks that you are participating in phase 3 of this landscape conservation design. Phase 1 and phase 2 took us a total of about 4 years to really kind of get up and running. And we have a lot of information. As I said, again, I didn't get the website on this particular slide, but it's crownmanagerspartnership.org. You'll find landscape conservation design. There's a lot of entryways there for you. But what's going to happen with all the great knowledge that you shared with us already? Right. Well, we will continually to respectfully engage knowledge holders, just like Quinn suggested, right? This isn't sort of a one-off kind of a thing. We're all hopeful that these things that we talk about and the things that we use apply our knowledges to have long-term outcomes. And so that's going to continue to be a part of it to ensure we're gathering information and synthesizing it well. For the short term, that means a summary and a share out of the workshop report. As Mike mentioned, our cultural committees are going to review the things that the tribal entities and the elders and the cultural committees put together, and they're going to submit a report from those cultural committees with the knowledges that they're willing to share with us. And then we'll take that and, of course, everything that we've done here and synthesize it as best we can, provide that as a report to all of you and to our many partners to review and evaluate, right? We also need to complete the workshop objectives. As you all know, we've worked really hard every one of these sessions, but we may not have gotten to the very end of it. So our LCD analysis team, many of whom are facilitators here, will get together and make sure we sort of put the final A to Z, as our Canadian partners say, on the work that we've done so that this workshop is whole in and of itself. We will also... forgotten to click through my things there. There's, kind of a summary that I showed you this once before, right? How we're already summarizing some of the key attributes and indicators from the first week. But then the other concept here is that we've only kind of addressed 3 of the features that we collectively identified as important elements of the crown of the continent landscape. As you know, riparian, aquatic, and wetlands. We have another number of other features. We will be hosting similar workshops through 2026 and probably early 2027 to complete similar types of evaluations for each of these features. And the next one, I believe, that's on the docket is ungulates. So it'll be a primary focus on deer and elk. And I wouldn't be surprised if we had some input on bison as well. We're still kind of working through some of that sort of cultural, ecological integration. And so anyway, next one coming up is on ungulates. If you work for an agency or an organization or a tribe and you know ungulate specialists out there, tell them how valuable and what you thought of this workshop, because we're really looking for, as Noreen had mentioned, broader participation, especially from decision-making bodies, right? Okay, so those workshops will, hopefully produce similar results of what we got here. There's a lot more synthesis going on, but mostly, or not mostly, but along with that, building relationships and forming these working groups that Quinn mentioned, right? These regional kind of landscape scale working groups where we're pulling this knowledge all together and making decisions wisely across large geographies. That's where we're headed here, right? And then we integrate these conservation strategies. Once again, I blew it. I didn't use roadmap here, right? Integrate these roadmaps that we're developing for each of these features. Now, you all saw overlap, and we saw several really key overlaps. Well, the one I want to mention was Gwen, when she was reporting out what they were talking about down in Ronan, Montana, was the fact that the tribe needs to share their success stories, right? And we all heard that in some of these other these roadmaps, right? Is that getting this information out and repeating it is an important element of it. So that's how you see we're going to integrate these conservation strategies. And then across threats and across the features, right? What's good for wetlands and riparian is also should be good for bull trout and west slope cutthroat trout. So that's where we're heading with those things, right? Ultimately, it's going to take a lot of work and effort and a lot of knowledge and coordination, communication. But what will synthesize these together is this roadmap for the crown of the continent that addresses the many things that we feel are important. And remember, those things that we feel are important are really just representatives of broader biological, cultural diversity, right? And if we can make some headway on some of these, we're going to be making headway on more broader issues. And so that's what's going to happen with the LCD over the next 2 years. And so I'll end it there, Gwen. Any questions, comments, criticisms? All right. With that, I think everyone gets 4 minutes of their day back.
Wait, we should ask Mike. Mike, did Mike have any last?
No, we're gonna continue here with the elders for a while. And then we'll, like I said earlier, Sean and Gwen and myself and Kenneth and whoever wants to meet with us later on to put all the notes and everything together, and then we'll report back. And then we get our checks, right?
Checks in the mail.
They're waiting at the door, Mike.
All right. Sounds good.
Okay.
All right. Well, thanks everyone for being our guinea pigs and for sharing your knowledge and your passion. And we'll get back to you with a summary of all the work that we've done over the last 3 days. A total of probably 60, 70 people have participated at this point. We think that's shared conservation planning, and thank you very much.